I never thought I would end up here. When the job offer arrived in my inbox, it looked suspiciously vague. Seasonal logistics position, Arctic research facility. High compensation, limited term contract, confidentiality required. There was no company logo, no address, only a contact number that routed to an automated voice instructing me to reply via encrypted email. I should have ignored it, but at the time I was drowning in overdue rent. My truck was about to be repossessed, and I just walked away from a factory job that promised nothing but 30 more years of sore backs and empty paychecks. The promise of 3 months of work for nearly triple my annual salary was enough to make me forget the warning bells screaming in the back of my head. I signed, I clicked accept, and a week later I was on a plane with 6 strangers heading to the top of the world. The plane had no windows. It was a military cargo hauler, the kind that swallowed you in a belly of steel and webbing straps, where your only company was the guttural roar of engines and the reek of fuel and cold metal. No one told us where we were going. The 7 of us sat across from each other on narrow benches, stealing awkward glances but never speaking. It felt like a funeral procession, each of us quietly bargaining with ourselves about why we had taken this contract. I watched the condensation of my breath and tried to focus on the numbers. 12 weeks, 90 days, a paycheck big enough to erase my debts. When the plane finally shuddered down on a frozen plateau, the doors lowered with a grinding shriek and the outside world came flooding in. Blinding white, a sky so black it looked painted, and a wind that screamed like a living thing. My eyelashes froze together in seconds. I have never known silence and noise so absolute at once. Silence in the sense that there were no birds, no trees, no sign of life, and noise in the form of an endless blizzard clawing at us, tearing our words away before we could speak them. 2 snowcats were waiting for us, their treads churning in the drifts, headlights throwing beams of light that looked small and pitiful against the Arctic void. A man in a hooded parka waved us forward. We obeyed without hesitation. The ride felt endless. No horizon, no landmarks, just a sea of snow and ice where the world dissolved into white and gray. Time stopped making sense. I might have dozed, I might have sat with my eyes closed, but when I blinked awake, the driver was steering us toward a wall of jagged glacier. At first, it looked natural, like a fortress of ice shaped by centuries of storms. Then I noticed the seams, smooth lines too straight to be natural, faint shadows of steel embedded in the wall. The closer we came, the more obvious it became. There was a gate cut into the glacier, hidden beneath layers of frost and snow. Massive enough to swallow the snowcat whole. The gate opened as if it were breathing, a deep groan that rattled in my bones. We drove inside and the storm was cut off like someone had flipped a switch. The tunnel swallowed us, lit by fluorescent lights buried in the ceiling. The air was warmer, heavy, and smelled faintly of ozone. When the snowcat stopped, we were herded out into a wide steel chamber where the ice met concrete. Waiting for us was a woman in a white parka. Her ID badge clipped to her chest. The badge only said operations. She didn't introduce herself, didn't shake our hands, didn't smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice flat. "Orientation will be brief. You are here because you signed a contract. You will not ask questions beyond your clearance. You will do your jobs, follow protocols, and stay alive." She paused, letting the words hang in the stale air. "That last part is not a joke." Someone behind me laughed nervously. She didn't blink. We were divided into groups and assigned bunks in dormitories dug deep into the glacier. My room was a narrow rectangle of concrete painted the color of dust, a bunk bed bolted to the wall, and a locker that smelled faintly of bleach. There was no window. The only sound was the endless hum of the ventilation system. I lay down, exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you strain to hear what might be hiding in it. The next morning, or what I guessed was morning since there were no windows and no natural light, I found myself in a cafeteria that felt like a high school lunchroom built in a bunker. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The food was gray and tasteless, like it had been freeze-dried years ago. Around me, the other new arrivals ate in silence. The veterans sat together at a separate table. Older men and women with sunken eyes and pale skin that looked starved of sunlight. They didn't laugh, didn't chat, just ate mechanically. Every so often, one of them glanced at us newcomers with something that wasn't exactly hostility, but wasn't welcome either. When I finished my meal, I noticed something odd, a folded slip of paper shoved under my tray. I looked around, but no one seemed to acknowledge me. I pocketed it and waited until I was alone in the dorm before opening it. The handwriting was messy, scrawled as if written in a hurry. It read, "There are rules here. They will not tell you. Learn them fast." Rule #1, never look at the monitors after 02:15. Rule #2, if the intercom calls your name twice in a row, do not answer. Rule #3, do not take the elevator between floors after midnight. There are more. You will learn or you won't. The paper ended without a signature. My hands were shaking when I folded it back. I told myself it was a prank, some twisted hazing ritual by the veterans. But something about the way the operations officer had said, "Stay alive," came back to me then, sharp as ice. I tucked the paper under my pillow and tried not to think about it. The rest of the day was filled with orientation tasks, badge scans, safety lectures, a tour of the upper levels. The facility was larger than I'd imagined, a maze of corridors that stretched far deeper than the initial gate suggested. Every hallway looked the same, gray steel, buzzing lights. Doors with numeric codes. It was easy to get lost, too easy. When I asked one of the guides how deep the facility went, he only said, "Don't worry, your clearance won't take you below level 3. He didn't smile when he said it. By the time I returned to the dorm, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I climbed into my bunk, closed my eyes, and tried to let the hum of the ventilation lull me to sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the note in my pillow wasn't a prank. It was a warning, and I had no idea what time it was. Was it close to 02:15 already? I thought about the monitors I'd seen in the control room, screens flickering with static and images I hadn't recognized. I wondered what they showed after 02:15. I wondered what would happen if I looked. That night, in the darkness of the dorm, I heard the intercom crackle to life. A voice spoke a name I didn't recognize. It was calm, neutral, as if announcing a page at a hospital. A few seconds later, it spoke the name again, and then silence. No one moved, no one breathed. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, again, if you can even call it morning when there are no windows and the light never changes, I felt like my head had been stuffed with cotton. I had drifted in and out of shallow dreams all night, always half awake, my ears straining for the hiss of the intercom. When the call finally came, repeating a stranger's name twice, the dorm froze as if everyone was holding their breath. No one moved. Eventually the silence returned, but I never forgot that sound. The voice hadn't been robotic, it hadn't even sounded like a recording. It was calm, steady, with just the faintest trace of a human accent. It sounded like someone I could have passed in the hall, someone who could have sat across from me at breakfast. Breakfast itself was no easier. I carried my tray, sat down, and tried not to stare at the veterans. They looked even worse in the fluorescent light. Gray skin, hollow eyes, a weariness that seemed bone deep. One of them, a man with short gray hair and scars at his temples, looked up from his tray and locked eyes with me. He didn't blink for a long moment. When I finally looked away, my appetite had already vanished. I remembered the note under my pillow. Maybe I should have asked someone about it, but how do you ask about rules that no one is supposed to acknowledge? Instead, I decided to explore. After breakfast, when the rest of my group was being shown the labs again, I slipped away down a corridor. It was easy, too easy, to get lost in this place. Every hallway stretched like a mirror of the last, gray walls, buzzing lights, air that smelled faintly metallic, as if the steel itself was sweating. That's when I saw the monitors. They were set into the wall in a narrow control room with no one inside. Dozens of screens flickered with grainy footage, empty corridors, storage bays, stairwells, doors that didn't appear on the maps I'd been given. The footage was all tinted blue, washed out by dim light. On one screen, a figure in a white parka walked down a hall. I leaned closer, squinting. The parka looked familiar. I thought of the operations officer who had greeted us, but the figure never turned, never looked at the camera, just kept walking, step after step, as though the hallway had no end. A throat cleared behind me. I jumped so hard I nearly fell into the console. It was one of the veterans, the scarred man who had stared at me during breakfast. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice rasped like sandpaper. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I was just... He stepped closer, his hand landing on my shoulder. His grip was cold, too strong. "Do you know what time it is?" I glanced at the clock above the monitors. 13:42, early afternoon. "It's fine," he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder, never after 0215, do you understand? My mouth went dry. The words from the note echoed in my head. The monitors, I whispered. He stared at me a moment longer, then nodded once. Good, you're already ahead of the others. Keep your head down, don't draw attention. He let go of my shoulder and walked away, leaving me alone with the hum of the monitors. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Ahead of the others, did that mean someone had slipped up before me? How many hadn't lasted? I tried to sleep, but the dorm felt claustrophobic, the hum of the ventilation too loud. Sometime after lights out, I slipped from my bunk and decided to take a walk. Maybe if I tired myself out, sleep would finally come. The corridors at night were worse. The lights were dimmer, flickering in places, casting long shadows that seemed to bend when I looked directly at them. My footsteps echoed too loudly, as if the facility were amplifying every sound. I turned corners, past doors with labels I didn't understand. Cryo 7, OBS 4, Containment A. Some of them had keypads glowing faintly red, others had no handles at all. That's when I heard it, the intercom crackle. My heart stopped. It whispered my name once. The sound bounced off the walls, thin and metallic. I froze, my skin prickled, the hairs on my neck standing straight up. Then it whispered my name again. I remembered the rule: if the intercom calls your name twice, do not answer. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood and pressed my back to the wall. The intercom went silent, but the buzzing lights above me flickered once, twice, as though something unseen had just moved through the circuit. When I finally stumbled back to the dorm, I found another note under my pillow. Same messy handwriting. Rule #4, do not follow anyone if they beckon you past the red line in the mess hall, no matter who they look like. I sat there on my bunk, clutching the note, my breath shallow. Whoever was leaving these, they were watching me. They knew where I slept when I left, what I had seen. The next day, I confronted the scarred veteran in the cafeteria. He sat alone, chewing slowly, his eyes hollow. I slid into the seat across from him and laid the note on the table. You wrote these? I asked. He didn't look at me. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. What is this place? What are these rules? Finally, he looked up. His eyes were gray, rimmed red, filled with something that wasn't just exhaustion, it was resignation. You don't want to know. Knowing doesn't help. Following does. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to. Just remember them. You'll last longer. He pushed the note back toward me. His hand trembled as he lifted his fork again. Longer, not long. I wanted to press him, demand answers, but something in his gaze silenced me. He looked like a man already dead, just waiting for his body to catch up. Later that day, during orientation duty in the supply bay, I overheard two scientists whispering. One of them, a woman with sharp features, said the containment readings spiked again last night if it keeps breaching through the circuits. Shut up, the man hissed, glancing at me. They lowered their voices, but the word containment clung to me like frostbite. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My heart pounded, my throat dry. I thought of the rules, scrawled in ink by a trembling hand. Rules that weren't in any manual. Rules no one would admit existed. And I realized something that chilled me deeper than the Arctic wind outside. They weren't rules to keep us safe. They were rules to keep something else from noticing us. The assignment came sooner than I expected. After only a few days of menial tasks, hauling crates, logging inventory, sweeping frost from corridors that never seemed to stay clean, I was summoned to the operations desk. The same woman who had greeted us on our arrival handed me a clipboard and a badge with the word temporary clearance, level 2 stamped across it. You'll be monitoring Wing B tonight, she said, her tone flat, as if she were ordering me to mop a hallway instead of watch over a restricted sector. Report to the control room at 2200. Do not deviate from your assignment. I opened my mouth to ask what exactly I'd be monitoring, but her eyes flicked up, hard as glass, and the words died in my throat. Wing B. I'd heard whispers in the cafeteria, scientists muttering over coffee, guards speaking in hushed tones. Wing B was where the subjects were kept. No one ever explained what the subjects were. No one dared. When the time came, I followed the map on my clipboard through a series of hallways colder than the rest of the facility, the kind of cold that gnawed at your bones even though the air was warm. The control room was small, lined with outdated consoles and a wall of monitors. Each screen glowed faintly, showing angles of sterile corridors, locked doors, and rooms filled with equipment I couldn't identify. A guard sat slumped in a chair when I arrived, his cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked up briefly, gave me a nod that might have been a warning or just fatigue, and muttered, "Stay awake, don't touch anything, and for God's sake, don't answer the intercom." Then he left just like that. No briefing, no training. I was alone. The hours dragged. At first, I tried to distract myself by counting the flickers on the monitors. The way the fluorescent lights above the corridors seemed to buzz at irregular intervals. But the longer I watched, the more I realized there was a rhythm to it, like breathing. The lights dimmed, bright, and dimmed again, as if the facility itself were alive, inhaling and exhaling through the wiring. Midnight came. I remembered the rule: do not take the elevator between floors after midnight. I wasn't planning to go anywhere, but the words burned in my mind anyway. I glanced at the clock above the console. 0003. My skin prickled. The intercom crackled. My heart skipped. I leaned forward, staring at the speaker above the door. A voice whispered a name, not mine, a woman's name I didn't recognize. It repeated it once, then fell silent. I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling. The monitors flickered. On one of them, a corridor went dark just for a second. When the lights came back, something was standing in the frame. I leaned closer. It was a figure in a white parka, facing away from the camera, head bowed. The same one I'd seen on the monitors days before. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there, like a mannequin planted in the middle of the hall. I swallowed hard and looked away, focusing on another monitor. Empty hallways, locked doors, silence. When I looked back, the figure was gone. The clock ticked forward. 0130. My eyelids grew heavy. I shook myself, stood up, paced the tiny room. The hum of the ventilation filled my ears like static. Then the intercom crackled again. This time it spoke my name, once. The sound crawled into my skull, familiar and wrong at the same time. It sounded like my mother calling me for dinner when I was a child, the same tone, the same cadence. It spoke my name again. Every instinct screamed to answer, to say yes, or I'm here. My throat worked, but I bit down on my tongue until blood filled my mouth. The note's warning repeated in my head: if the intercom calls your name twice, do not answer. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The intercom hissed, then went silent. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, on the monitors, a door in Wingby slid open on its own. The camera showed a dark room beyond, too dark for the lens to penetrate. The image shimmered, distorted, as if something inside was interfering with the feed. I felt a pressure in my ears, the same sensation you get on an airplane when your eardrums pop, only worse, deeper, like something pressing against my skull. The clock ticked over to 0215. The monitors glitched. Static swallowed the screens. Images flickering too fast for me to process. Faces pressed against glass, mouths opening too wide, eyes like black pits. The static cleared, and for half a second I saw my own reflection in one of the monitors, except it wasn't me. Its eyes were wrong, its smile was too wide. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair. My breath came ragged, my chest tight, then everything went still. The monitors returned to their grainy feeds of empty hallways. The clock read 0216. The intercom crackled one last time, a whisper barely audible brushing against my ear. "We see you." I bolted. I don't even remember leaving the control room, only that I found myself running down the corridor, my boots slamming against the steel floor, the sound echoing too loudly. I didn't stop until I reached the dorm and collapsed onto my bunk, shaking so hard my teeth rattled. The next morning, a new note was waiting under my pillow. Rule #5. If you see yourself on the monitors, leave immediately. Do not wait to see what it does. I didn't eat breakfast that day. I didn't speak to anyone. I just sat there staring at the note, my hands cold despite the stale warmth of the dorm. Whoever was leaving these notes knew exactly what I had seen. They knew what time I had been in that room, and that meant they were watching me. I told myself to quit, to demand a ride back on the next supply plane. But when I asked another worker about leaving early, he only laughed bitterly. "You think they'll let you walk out? No one leaves before their contract ends, not unless the rules take them first." That night, I was assigned to Wing B again, and this time I knew the rules weren't enough to keep me safe. By the fourth week, the faces around me had become familiar, though never comfortable. The facility had a way of draining warmth from people. Even when someone smiled, it felt brittle, rehearsed, like they were practicing an expression they had almost forgotten how to use. I'd started to learn the names of a few colleagues, piecing together what little information I could from the fragments they allowed me. There was Miller, a technician who handled most of the electrical systems. He was tall, gaunt, with a twitch in his left eye that seemed to get worse the longer he stayed awake, which was most of the time. Miller drank constantly, though I never saw where he got the alcohol. His breath always carried the sour tang of whiskey, his hands always trembling. "Keeps me steady," he muttered once when he caught me staring. "Keeps them out." I didn't ask who them was. Then there was Dr. Halloran. He ran one of the laboratories, though no one ever explained which one or what exactly they studied. His lab coat was always spotless, his glasses reflecting the fluorescent light so I could never quite meet his eyes. He spoke in clipped sentences, clinical, detached, as though every word was measured. Once when I tried to make small talk, he said, "Your presence here is a variable. Try not to contaminate the data." I wasn't sure if he meant the research or the staff. The only one who seemed remotely human was Anna, a nurse assigned to the infirmary. She was young, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and a smile that seemed too calm for this place. She always greeted me kindly, always asked if I was sleeping well, eating enough, but there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't place. When she looked at me, it wasn't with pity or friendliness, it was with calculation. As if she were weighing me against some invisible scale. I started noticing patterns. Miller avoided Wing B entirely, muttering excuses whenever his shifts were rotated there. Halloran never left his lab during the night hours, yet somehow his name never appeared on the rosters. Anna appeared in places she wasn't assigned, once in the cafeteria long after lights out, another time in the control corridor where medical staff had no reason to be. She smiled when I asked why she was there, then changed the subject. One night, after another grueling shift in Wing B where the intercom had stayed mercifully silent, I sat in the cafeteria with Miller. He nursed a flask, his eyes darting to the corners of the room as if he expected something to emerge from the shadows. I decided to take a risk. "There are rules here," I said quietly. "Unspoken ones." His eyes snapped to mine, wild and bloodshot. "Who told you?" "No one notes. Someone's been leaving them for me." He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Burn them, don't keep them in your room." "Why? They're warnings. Warnings are just bait." He hissed, "They want you thinking about the rules. The more you think, the more they know. That's how they crawl in." He took a shaky gulp from the flask and leaned closer. "It's not the research that kills you, it's the rules. Remember that." Before I could press him further, Halloran entered the cafeteria. The room seemed to stiffen. Even the veterans lowered their gazes. Halloran moved with a precision that unsettled me, every step deliberate. He carried a stack of folders and glanced briefly at me before walking past. For the briefest second, I thought I saw his reflection in the metal surface of a serving tray, except the reflection lagged half a second behind. My breath caught, and when I blinked, it was gone. Anna approached my table later. She set a tray down and sat across from me, her calm smile never wavering. "You're adjusting well," she said, her voice soft. "Better than most." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning. "Do you know who leaves the notes?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to my pocket where I had tucked the most recent one. "It doesn't matter who. What matters is whether you follow them. Why not tell us openly? Why hide the rules?" She tilted her head as though considering how much to say. "Some truths are easier to survive when they're unspoken. Language draws attention." "From what?" Her smile widened. But her eyes didn't. "You'll understand when you've been here longer." That night, I found another note under my pillow. The handwriting was shakier than before, ink smudged as if written in haste. Rule #6, if you hear knocking from inside the walls, do not respond. It is not maintenance. Sleep was impossible after that. Every creak of the ventilation system became a threat. Every groan of the ice shifting above us felt like knuckles rapping against the concrete. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound that would prove the rule true. The next day, Miller didn't show up for breakfast. I asked around, but no one seemed surprised. "Rotation," someone muttered. Another worker said, "Probably reassigned." But their eyes told a different story. They avoided looking at me, avoided speaking too loud, as if acknowledging his absence might summon something worse. Halloran, on the other hand, seemed more animated than usual. He moved through the corridors with a sharpness, muttering to himself, his folders clutched tight. Once I passed by his lab and heard voices inside. At first, I thought he was speaking with another scientist, but then I realized there was only one voice, his, and it was answering itself in different tones, like two people holding a conversation through one mouth. I backed away before the door could open. Anna found me later in the infirmary, claiming she needed to check my vitals. She wrapped the cuff around my arm, her hands steady, her eyes studying my face. "You've been on night shifts," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, have you seen them yet?" My throat tightened. "Seen what?" "The ones who look like us." I froze. Her smile never faltered. "When you do, remember they're never in the right place. Trust your memory. If you saw them elsewhere and they appear again too quickly, it's not them." She removed the cuff, scribbled something on a clipboard, and handed me a slip of paper. "Take this for the headaches." When I unfolded it later in my dorm, I expected medication instructions. Instead, it was another note. Rule #7, if a colleague speaks in a voice you've already heard that night, leave immediately. They are not your colleague. That night, lying awake, I finally understood the truth. The facility wasn't just hiding something in Wing B. It wasn't just about research or containment. Whatever lived beneath the ice was leaking into us, our voices, our faces, our patterns. The rules weren't just about survival. They were about identity, about holding onto the fragile thread of who we were before the Arctic began to remake us in its image. And I was already beginning to wonder how long before the thread snapped. Rule #3 had seemed simple enough. Never take the elevator between floors after midnight. It was the kind of warning I could follow easily, tucked into the back of my mind alongside the others. But in this place, rules didn't exist just to be remembered. They existed to test you, to catch you off guard when your exhaustion or curiosity or sheer bad luck pushed you across the line. And the night I broke Rule #3, it wasn't bravery that did it. It was accident. I'd been assigned another monitoring shift, this time not in Wing B, but in the supply levels 2 floors down. My job was simple: log incoming crates, scan barcodes, and make sure no unauthorized items came in through the cargo drop. The hours blurred together as I stacked box after box, my body aching from the cold that seeped through the walls. Midnight crept up on me without notice. My clipboard said I was free to clock out. So I headed toward the elevator. I wasn't thinking about the rule. I wasn't even thinking about the time. My body was on autopilot, moving toward the familiar hum of the elevator, my badge already in hand. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside and pressed the button for level 2. It wasn't until the doors sealed shut and the cab shuddered downward that I glanced at the clock on the panel. 00:07. Realization hit like ice water down my spine. Midnight had already passed. The cab groaned, descending too slowly, the fluorescent lights above me flickering. My breath fogged in the air, though the elevator should have been heated. The temperature was dropping by the second. I jabbed the button for level 3, hoping to override it, but the panel didn't respond. The numbers ticked down: B1, B2, B3. Then the cab stopped. The doors slid open with a grinding squeal, revealing a corridor I had never seen on any map. The lights were dim, flickering, shadows pooling in the corners. The air that rushed in was colder than the surface storm, sharp enough to sting my lungs. My instincts screamed to stay put, but some subtle pressure in my head, like fingers prodding at my thoughts, compelled me forward. I stepped out. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, vanishing into darkness. Frost clung to the steel walls, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like veins or roots, twisting and branching in unnatural symmetry. I walked slowly, each footstep echoing too loudly. At the far end, a heavy door stood ajar, pale light spilling through the gap. Against my better judgment, I pushed it open. Inside was a vast chamber carved directly into the glacier, the ceiling vanishing into shadows. Transparent walls of ice lined the space, forming cells or tanks, I couldn't tell which. Shapes shifted behind them, vague and half-seen through the frosted surfaces. Some were tall and thin, others hunched and grotesque, their movements sluggish, as though they were submerged in a medium thicker than water. Every few seconds, I swore I saw faces pressing against the ice, mouths gaping soundlessly, eyes dark and hollow. One of the shapes moved closer, sliding against the ice until its features pressed inches from my own reflection. Its face was blurred, but I recognized the curve of the jaw, the slope of the brow. It was me. I stumbled back, my stomach lurching. The shape tilted its head, mirroring my panic, then raised one hand and tapped against the ice. The sound reverberated through the chamber like knuckles rapping on glass. Tap, tap, tap. I turned and fled. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching impossibly far. My footsteps thundered in my ears. The walls pulsed with frost patterns that writhed and twisted as though alive. Behind me, I heard the knocking spread, hundreds of knuckles pounding against hundreds of walls. Tap, 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 louder, faster, desperate. I hurled myself into the elevator cab and slammed my palm against the panel. The doors slid shut just as something heavy struck the other side. The cab shuddered violently, the lights strobing. For a moment, I thought the elevator would plummet into the abyss. Then mercifully, it lurched upward, carrying me back to level 2. When the doors opened, Anna was waiting. She stood there calmly, her hands folded in front of her, as though she had known exactly where I would emerge. Her eyes flicked over me, then to the frost clinging to my jacket. "You took the elevator," she said. I couldn't speak. My lungs burned, my body trembling. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They're not supposed to see you yet." Before I could ask what she meant, she pressed something into my hand, another note. Rule #8, if you find yourself below level 3, never look directly at the ice. It remembers faces. She walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the humming corridor. That night, I lay in my bunk shivering, replaying the sight of my own blurred reflection pressing against the ice. My hand still tingled where it had touched the frost, as if something had seeped through the barrier and into my skin. I closed my eyes, but the sound followed me into my dreams, knuckles tapping, endlessly patient, waiting for me to answer. Tap, 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 and I realized with growing dread that Rule #3 hadn't been a warning to protect me from them. It had been a warning to protect them from me, because now that I'd broken it, the ice knew my face. The facility had a way of swallowing people. One day they were there, sitting across from you in the cafeteria, shuffling past you in the corridor, grumbling during assignments, and the next they were gone. No goodbyes, no explanations, just absence, like the ice itself had decided to reclaim them. It happened first with one of the new hires, a man named Decker. I hadn't spoken to him much. Only enough to know he had a kid back home and a laugh that sounded too loud in these suffocating halls. That night the intercom crackled while I was in my bunk. "Decker," it said, calm and steady. Then again, "Decker." I held my breath, clutching the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. No one in the dorm moved. The silence stretched, suffocating. Then faintly, footsteps in the hall. I didn't dare leave my bunk, but I heard the sound, Decker's door creaking open. His boots shuffling on the floor, then fading into the distance. The next morning, his bunk was empty. The sheets had been stripped, the locker cleared. No trace of him remained. At breakfast, I asked Miller what happened. He stared at me, eyes bloodshot, flask trembling in his grip. He answered, was all he said. Then he drank long and hard until his hands steadied again. Officially, the story was different. A notice pinned to the bulletin board claimed Decker had been evacuated for illness. But I'd seen the trail of boot prints leading down the corridor outside our dorm, half erased by the night's drafts. I'd seen the faint smear of something dark against the wall, quickly painted over by maintenance. Illness didn't leave marks like that. The atmosphere shifted after Decker vanished. The veterans grew quieter, eyes darting to the intercom whenever it hissed, as though waiting for it to call their names next. The new hires, what few of us remained, whispered theories late at night, trying to piece together what had happened. But deep down, we already knew. One evening, I caught Anna in the infirmary, her hands busy restocking supplies. I lowered my voice, glancing at the cameras in the corners. What happens when someone answers? She didn't look up. They're gone. Gone where? Finally, she met my eyes. You don't want to know. I pressed. "Decker, did you see him?" Her face was unreadable, but her voice softened. "Sometimes the facility calls people by name because it wants them. Sometimes because it wants the rest of us to listen. The ones who answer don't come back." Not really, that word really stuck with me. 2 nights later, another name came over the intercom. This time it was a veteran, a woman named Sanders, who had survived here for nearly 6 months. The voice called once, twice. Silence followed. For a moment I thought she'd resisted, but in the morning her bunk was stripped bare. I started to notice other things. Hallways that once bustled with staff now felt emptier. The cafeteria lines grew shorter, the conversations quieter. Every missing face was explained away with the same excuse: illness, evacuation, reassignment. Yet the ice never gave anything back. One night, after another shift in Wing B, I returned to the dorm to find a folded paper waiting on my pillow. Rule #9, if someone you know knocks on your door after lights out, do not open. Check their bunk in the morning. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the door, every creak in the corridor making my heart. Around 0300, the knock came, 3 raps, slow and deliberate. "Hey," a voice whispered, Decker's voice. "It's me, let me in." My blood ran cold. I gripped the blanket, forcing myself not to move, not to breathe. "Please," the voice begged, "it's so cold out here." The doorknob rattled, then stilled. Footsteps shuffled away. Silence returned. At dawn, I checked. Decker's bunk was still empty, stripped bare. He had been gone for days. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. Some things were better left unsaid in this place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the facility wasn't just killing us, it was recycling us. Using our voices, our faces, our patterns. Each disappearance left an echo behind, something that wore the skin of the missing and lingered in the walls. That theory became harder to ignore when I saw Sanders again. It was in one of the lower corridors, a maintenance wing I'd never been assigned before. I turned a corner and there she was, Sanders, her parka zipped up to her chin, her hair tied back in the same braid I'd seen every morning at breakfast. For a heartbeat, relief flooded me. "Sanders," I said, stepping forward. She didn't answer. She only stared, her eyes too wide, her smile too sharp. Then she raised a hand and beckoned me forward, her fingers curling in a gesture that was almost playful. My stomach dropped. I remembered the rule: do not follow anyone if they beckon you past the red line in the mess hall, no matter who they look like. We weren't in the mess hall, but the intent was the same. She turned slowly, stepping toward a door marked with a faded symbol I didn't recognize. Her hand waved again, urging me to follow. I ran. When I looked back, the corridor was empty. The next morning, another note waited under my pillow. Rule #10, if you see a vanished colleague again, do not speak to them. They are learning how to answer back. The facility was hollowing out. People vanished one by one. Their absences explained away with lies, their echoes returning in forms we weren't meant to trust. And with each disappearance, the silence grew heavier, pressing down on us all like the weight of the glacier above. I realized then that survival here wasn't about strength or skill. It was about memory, remembering who was real, who wasn't, and never ever answering when the ice called your name. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it called mine again. By the time Sanders vanished, the lies had become too thin to hold. You can only tell people so many times that their colleagues have been evacuated for illness before the excuses rot. We all knew what was happening, even if none of us had the courage to name it aloud. The facility wasn't protecting us, it was feeding us to something. And one night, when exhaustion cracked my caution, I found proof. It began with Miller. He cornered me in the cafeteria after a shift. His hands trembling worse than usual, his flask nearly empty. His twitching eye darted around the room before he leaned close and whispered, "They keep records, logs, everything that's happened here. It's written down, not in the official files. Those are scrubbed clean, but the real reports, you'll find them below." "Below where?" I asked, my voice low. His lips pulled into a humorless smile. "Where you're not supposed to go." That was all he said. He staggered away. Muttering to himself, his flask clutched like a lifeline, but his words burrowed deep. That night, after lights out, I slipped from my bunk. My heart hammered as I crept through the corridors, the hum of the ventilation masking my footsteps. I told myself I was only going to look, just to confirm what Miller had said. Curiosity was a dangerous thing here, but it was stronger than fear. The elevator waited, its panel glowing faintly. Rule #3 screamed in my head: never take the elevator between floors after midnight. The clock on my wrist read 23:47. I had 13 minutes. Enough. I swiped my badge, the doors slid open, and I descended. Level 4 wasn't on the maps. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor colder than any I'd known, my breath fogging instantly. Frost coated the walls, curling into patterns that looked disturbingly like script, lines and curves too deliberate to be random. I moved carefully, each step echoing in the stillness. At the end of the hall, I found a door marked Archive. The keypad beside it was dark, lifeless, but when I pressed my badge to the panel, the lock clicked open, as though it had been waiting for me. Inside was a room filled with filing cabinets, shelves of binders, and stacks of paper yellowed with age. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. The air smelled of dust and something sour, like meat gone bad. I pulled the first binder from the shelf. The cover read, "Containment Log Subject A1. My hands shook as I opened it. Entries were clinical, detached. Specimen recovered from glacial trench, depth 2, 7 miles. Initial morphology, amorphous, exhibiting mimicry of organic matter. Response to electrical current, anomalous. Subject appears dormant until exposed to human presence, reactivates by unknown mechanism. I flipped the pages, my stomach twisting with each line. First contact resulted in auditory hallucinations among staff, voices mimicking known individuals. Containment protocols initiated, auditory denial, visual avoidance. Another entry, specimen demonstrates cognitive imprinting. Observed staff replicates behaviors. Accurate mimicry of speech patterns within 48 hours. Identity confusion among personnel leading to fatalities. New directive, establish unspoken rules to prevent recognition errors. My blood turned to ice. The rules, they weren't arbitrary. They were containment measures. Rituals to keep us from falling prey to something that learned by watching us. I pulled another binder. Subject B3 incident report. Personnel breach. Subject appeared in corridor assuming identity of Dr. Keating. 3 staff followed, believing orders authentic. Only 1 returned, survivor incoherent. Repeated phrase, the ice remembers. Page after page told the same story. Subjects breaching containment, assuming forms, using voices. Luring staff away. Each time the survivors wrote new rules, refined protocols, whispered warnings passed down through notes and half-truths. The facility itself never acknowledged them. Officially, the rules didn't exist. Unofficially, they were the only reason anyone was left alive. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. I spun, the binder nearly slipping from my hands. Halloran stood in the doorway, his glasses glinting in the swinging bulb. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something cold and sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I needed to know," I whispered. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The bulb flickered, shadows leaping across his face. Curiosity is dangerous. It makes you visible. Visible to what? My voice cracked. The things in the ice, the ones that mimic us. Halloran's smile was thin, brittle. They are not things, not anymore. Once they see you, they don't forget. They don't stop. That's why the rules exist, not for you, for them. I backed away, the binder clutched to my chest. Why hide it? Why not warn everyone properly? "Because words have weight," he said softly. "Language is a signal. The more we speak of them, the louder we call. The rules are whispers, subtle enough to avoid notice, most of the time." His gaze flicked to the binder in my hands. "Put that back, pretend you never saw it. It's the only way you'll last here." But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something else. They didn't reflect the light properly. They shimmered just slightly, as though a thin layer of ice coated them. "Are you?" I began. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the archive, absolute and suffocating. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of wet earth and rot. Somewhere in the dark, a whisper, my name soft and familiar in my mother's voice. I bolted. The door slammed against the wall as I shoved through, sprinting down the frost-choked hall, the binder clutched tight. The darkness seemed to follow, pressing against my back, filling my ears with whispers that weren't words but promises. I didn't stop until I collapsed in the stairwell 2 levels up, my chest heaving, my hands numb. The binder was gone. I didn't remember dropping it, but my arms were empty. When I stumbled back to my bunk hours later, another note was waiting. Rule #11, do not search for the archives. What is written there does not stay quiet. I tore the note to pieces, but the words had already carved themselves into my memory. The rules weren't just warnings. They were negotiations, lines drawn in the snow between us and the things that wanted us, and I had crossed one. That night, as I tried to sleep, I felt the ice pressing against the walls, closer than before, as though it remembered me. And in my dreams, I saw my own reflection, smiling back from the other side of the glass. The storm came without warning. One moment the surface sensors reported mild winds, the next they were screaming with red alerts, blizzard conditions, visibility 0, supply routes cut off. The facility sealed its gates, locking us in beneath miles of ice. The operations officer announced over the loudspeakers that rations would be extended, outside contact suspended until the storm passed. Her voice was calm, steady, too calm at first. Treated it like any other emergency drill. We'd been cut off before, the facility was designed for it, but this time felt different. The lights began to flicker, the temperature dropped, and the walls groaned as though the glacier itself were leaning in. We huddled in the cafeteria, silent except for the wind howling above us. Miller sat across from me, his flask empty, his hands shaking violently. "This is it," he muttered. "Storm like this, power goes down, containment breaks." "They'll come through." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He laughed bitterly. Who do you think? That night the lights failed. It began with a stutter, fluorescence buzzing, shadows dancing across the walls, then silence as the entire facility plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, dim and red, bathing the corridors in a bloody glow. The hum of the ventilation faltered, replaced by a low, distant knocking. At first I thought it was the ice shifting. Then I realized it was coming from the walls. Tap, tap, tap. Voices whispered through the intercoms, overlapping, dozens at once. Some were names I recognized, some were voices I trusted, others were strangers. All of them spoke at once, a chorus of familiarity twisted into something alien. People panicked. A scientist sprinted down the hall, shouting for help, only to vanish around a corner. When we followed, the hall was empty. His lab coat lay crumpled on the floor. Still warm, Halloran emerged from the shadows, his glasses gone, his eyes glittering like shards of ice. He gathered us in the cafeteria, his voice sharp and commanding. Listen to me, containment has failed, protocol requires a sacrifice. Murmurs rippled through the room, someone shouted, "What are you talking about?" Halloran's gaze cut through us like a scalpel. One must be given to them willingly to appease the breach, it is the only way. Miller stood, swaying, his flask dangling from his fingers. "You're insane," he spat. "You want us to just hand someone over." Halloran smiled thinly. "Do you think we've lasted this long by chance? Every storm, every failure, someone is chosen. That is the cost of survival." The room erupted, shouts, denials, fear. I looked to Anna, who stood silently at the back. Her face was calm, too calm, her eyes fixed on me. That night, chaos consumed the facility. The storm raged above, the walls shuddered, and the red emergency lights painted everything in shades of blood. The rules, once lifelines, became impossible to follow. The intercom called names over and over, repeating them until people broke, stumbling into the halls to answer voices they thought belonged to loved ones. The elevators groaned to life on their own, doors sliding open to reveal nothing but frost-choked shafts. The knocking in the walls grew louder, more insistent, as though the ice itself were demanding entry. I tried to cling to the rules, whispering them to myself like prayers. Never look at the monitors after 02:15. Don't answer the intercom. Don't open the door if someone knocks, but they fractured under the weight of too many violations. Sanders's echo beckoned from the hall. Decker's voice called through the vents. Monitors flickered even when I turned away, showing reflections that weren't mine. Miller broke first. I found him in the stairwell, shouting at shadows, his flask shattered on the floor. "I won't be the sacrifice," he screamed. "You hear me? I won't." Then he ran, disappearing into the dark. We never saw him again. Halloran gathered what remained of us, less than half the staff, and led us toward Wing B. "They want blood," he said. "We'll give them what they demand." His words chilled me, but no one resisted. Fear had hollowed us out, left us too weak to fight. As we moved through the corridors, the facility groaned. Doors slammed open and shut. Lights flickered, the air filled with whispers. I felt eyes on me from every direction, pressing against my skull. The rules weren't holding anymore. The storm had broken the contract. We reached Wing B. The doors stood wide, frost spilling out like smoke. Inside, the cells of ice pulsed with light, shadows writhing behind them. The things within had grown restless, pressing against the barriers, their faces blurring into ours. One of them smiled at me. My own smile reflected back in frozen glass. Halloran turned to the group. "Choose," he said simply. No one spoke, no one moved. Then Anna stepped forward. Eyes locked with mine, calm, steady. "It doesn't have to be this way," she whispered. "There are other rules, older ones." Before I could ask what she meant, the ground shuddered. The ice groaned, cracking like thunder. One of the cells split open, frost exploding outward. Something crawled through, long, thin limbs, skin shimmering like glass, eyes hollow pits of black. It moved like liquid given form, sliding across the floor, its head tilting unnaturally. Panic erupted. Staff screamed. Scattering, Halloran stood frozen, his mouth moving soundlessly, his eyes shimmering with ice. Anna grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "Run," she hissed. "Forget their rules, follow mine." We sprinted through the collapsing corridors, the facility groaning around us. Lights died, alarms wailed, the storm above shaking the walls until chunks of ice rained down. Behind us, the whispers swelled into a roar, 1,000 voices speaking at once. We didn't stop until we reached the dorms. Anna slammed the door shut, her chest heaving. She pressed another note into my hand, her fingers cold as ice. Rule #12, when collapse begins, do not follow the crowd, they are already claimed. I unfolded it with trembling hands, the paper damp with frost. My mind reeled. The rules weren't just survival tactics, they were bargains. And now, with containment broken, the bargains had ended. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping. The facility was collapsing, and the things in the ice were free. By the time Sanders vanished, the lies had become too thin to hold. You can only tell people so many times that their colleagues have been evacuated for illness before the excuses rot. We all knew what was happening, even if none of us had the courage to name it aloud. The facility wasn't protecting us, it was feeding us to something. And one night, when exhaustion cracked my caution, I found proof. It began with Miller. He cornered me in the cafeteria after a shift. His hands trembling worse than usual, his flask nearly empty. His twitching eye darted around the room before he leaned close and whispered, "They keep records, logs, everything that's happened here. It's written down, not in the official files. Those are scrubbed clean, but the real reports, you'll find them below." "Below where?" I asked, my voice low, his lips pulled into a humorless smile. "Where you're not supposed to go." That was all he said. He staggered away. Muttering to himself, his flask clutched like a lifeline, but his words burrowed deep. That night, after lights out, I slipped from my bunk. My heart hammered as I crept through the corridors, the hum of the ventilation masking my footsteps. I told myself I was only going to look, just to confirm what Miller had said. Curiosity was a dangerous thing here, but it was stronger than fear. The elevator waited, its panel glowing faintly. Rule #3 screamed in my head, never take the elevator between floors after midnight. The clock on my wrist read 23:47. I had 13 minutes. Enough. I swiped my badge, the doors slid open, and I descended. Level 4 wasn't on the maps. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor colder than any I'd known, my breath fogging instantly. Frost coated the walls, curling into patterns that looked disturbingly like script, lines and curves too deliberate to be random. I moved carefully, each step echoing in the stillness. At the end of the hall, I found a door marked Archive. The keypad beside it was dark, lifeless, but when I pressed my badge to the panel, the lock clicked open, as though it had been waiting for me. Inside was a room filled with filing cabinets, shelves of binders, and stacks of paper yellowed with age. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. The air smelled of dust and something sour, like meat gone bad. I pulled the first binder from the shelf. The cover read, Containment Log Subject A1. My hands shook as I opened it. Entries were clinical, detached. Specimen recovered from glacial trench, depth 2, 7 miles. Initial morphology, amorphous, exhibiting mimicry of organic matter. Response to electrical current, anomalous. Subject appears dormant until exposed to human presence. Reactivates by unknown mechanism. I flipped the pages, my stomach twisting with each line. First contact resulted in auditory hallucinations among staff, voices mimicking known individuals. Containment protocols initiated, auditory denial, visual avoidance. Another entry, specimen demonstrates cognitive imprinting, observes staff, replicates behaviors, accurate mimicry of speech patterns within 48 hours, identity confusion among personnel leading to fatalities. New directive, establish unspoken rules to prevent recognition errors. My blood turned to ice. The rules, they weren't arbitrary, they were containment measures. Rituals to keep us from falling prey to something that learned by watching us. I pulled another binder. Subject B3 incident report. Personnel breach. Subject appeared in corridor assuming identity of Dr. Keating. 3 staff followed, believing orders authentic. Only 1 returned. Survivor incoherent. Repeated phrase, the ice remembers. Page after page told the same story. Subjects breaching containment, assuming forms, using voices. Luring staff away. Each time the survivors wrote new rules, refined protocols, whispered warnings passed down through notes and half-truths. The facility itself never acknowledged them. Officially, the rules didn't exist. Unofficially, they were the only reason anyone was left alive. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. I spun, the binder nearly slipping from my hands. Halloran stood in the doorway, his glasses glinting in the swinging bulb. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something cold and sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I needed to know," I whispered. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The bulb flickered, shadows leaping across his face. Curiosity is dangerous, it makes you visible. Visible to what? My voice cracked. The things in the ice, the ones that mimic us. Halloran's smile was thin, brittle. They are not things, not anymore. Once they see you, they don't forget, they don't stop. That's why the rules exist, not for you, for them. I backed away, the binder clutched to my chest. Why hide it? Why not warn everyone properly? Because words have weight, he said softly. Language is a signal. The more we speak of them, the louder we call. The rules are whispers, subtle enough to avoid notice, most of the time. His gaze flicked to the binder in my hands. Put that back, pretend you never saw it. It's the only way you'll last here. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something else. They didn't reflect the light properly. They shimmered just slightly, as though a thin layer of ice coated them. Are you? I began. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the archive, absolute and suffocating. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of wet earth and rot. Somewhere in the dark, a whisper, my name soft and familiar in my mother's voice. I bolted. The door slammed against the wall as I shoved through, sprinting down the frost-choked hall, the binder clutched tight. The darkness seemed to follow, pressing against my back, filling my ears with whispers that weren't words but promises. I didn't stop until I collapsed in the stairwell 2 levels up, my chest heaving, my hands numb. The binder was gone. I didn't remember dropping it, but my arms were empty. When I stumbled back to my bunk hours later, another note was waiting. Rule #11, do not search for the archives. What is written there does not stay quiet. I tore the note to pieces, but the words had already carved themselves into my memory. The rules weren't just warnings. They were negotiations, lines drawn in the snow between us and the things that wanted us, and I had crossed one. That night, as I tried to sleep, I felt the ice pressing against the walls, closer than before, as though it remembered me. And in my dreams, I saw my own reflection, smiling back from the other side of the glass. Night of the collapse bled into something worse. Time stopped having meaning. Without power, without daylight, there was only the storm above and the red glow of emergency lights flickering like dying embers. The air grew heavy, damp with frost and the faint copper tang of blood. Somewhere deep in the facility, metal screamed against metal as if the glacier itself was tearing the walls apart. I clutched Anna's note in my fist until the paper shredded. Rule #12, when collapse begins. Do not follow the crowd, they are already claimed. The words echoed in my skull as we listened to the chaos outside the dorm. Voices shouted, footsteps thundered, doors slammed. Some screamed for help, others barked orders, but they all moved in the same direction, toward Wing B, where Halloran had promised salvation through sacrifice. Anna grabbed my wrist, her grip cold and strong. We can't go with them, she said. They'll kill someone, I whispered. Her eyes were steady. Too steady, it won't matter, they're already dead. The intercom crackled then, though the power should have been gone. My name whispered through, calm and familiar, once, twice, then silence. I bit my tongue, tasting blood, refusing to answer. The dorm door rattled, knuckles tapped, 3 sharp raps, slow and deliberate. A voice followed. Hey, it said, Decker's voice. It's me, let me in. My blood froze. Anna leaned close, her lips brushing my ear. Don't move, don't speak. We waited, hearts hammering, as the doorknob twisted. The hinges groaned. Then just as suddenly, the sound stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. When we finally stepped into the hall, the facility was unrecognizable. The red emergency lights flickered on and off, plunging us into alternating shadows. The walls sweated frost, veins of ice crawling upward like roots. Doors gaped open, their frames warped, as though something massive had forced its way through. We moved slowly, my flashlight beam cutting thin slices through the dark. Twice I saw shapes at the end of corridors, figures in parkas, faces I recognized, Sanders, Miller, even Halloran. They stood perfectly still, watching, their mouths opening and closing without sound. When the beam touched them, they dissolved back into shadow. We can't go to Wing B, Anna whispered. That's where they're strongest. We need to find another way out. There is no other way out, I said. Well, she didn't answer. She just kept moving, her hand tight on mine. We reached the central stairwell, only to find the elevator doors hanging open, the shaft yawning black and endless. A wet, sucking sound echoed from below, as if something enormous was crawling upward through the dark. The rules screamed in my head, never take the elevator after midnight. But another rule, one Anna had given me, contradicted it. When collapse begins, do not follow the crowd. And the crowd had gone down the main halls. We can't stay here, she hissed. Something moved in the dark below. A pale hand, too long, gripped the edge of the shaft. Another followed. Then a face rose into the light. It was mine, my own reflection, grinning too wide, eyes hollow. I yanked Anna back and we fled. The facility had become a labyrinth. Corridors twisted into shapes I didn't recognize. Doors opened into places they shouldn't lead. Once we pushed through a maintenance hatch and found ourselves in the cafeteria, though it should have been 3 levels away. The tables were overturned, trays scattered, blood smeared across the floor. The red line across the center of the room glowed faintly. On the far side, Sanders stood. She lifted a hand and beckoned us forward. I froze, remembering Rule #4, do not follow anyone if they beckon you past the red line in the mess hall. Anna squeezed my hand hard. Don't move, she whispered. Sanders beckoned again, her smile stretching impossibly wide. Then, without warning, a dozen more figures spilled into the cafeteria, all beckoning in unison. Decker, Miller, even me, dozens of me standing shoulder to shoulder, hands curling in the same gesture. We ran. The corridors narrowed, twisted, until we burst into the archive chamber I had discovered before. Papers littered the floor, binders torn open. Pages scattered like fallen leaves. In the center stood Halloran. His lab coat hung in tatters, his eyes shimmering with ice. He held a clipboard as though nothing had changed, his voice calm. Containment requires order, he said. Without rules, there is only chaos. Without sacrifice, there is only hunger. He stepped forward, extending a hand. Come back, follow protocol, give them what they demand. Anna hissed, pulling me back. He's not real, but he looked real. He sounded real, and in his eyes, for just a moment, I saw desperation. Not hunger, not malice, desperation. Please, he whispered. If you don't, none of us will survive. The rules tangled in my mind, contradicting one another, overlapping until they meant nothing. Don't speak to vanished colleagues. Don't follow the crowd. Don't answer the intercom. Don't take the elevator. But what about now, when every option broke one rule or another? The floor shook, cracks split the walls, frost bursting outward. From the fractures, hands pressed through, hundreds of them pale and thin, fingers curling like roots. Faces followed, blurred and shifting. Eyes hollow pits that drank in the light. Anna screamed. Halloran dissolved into shadow, and the rules failed all at once. We fled again, sprinting through collapsing corridors, the whispers chasing us like a tide. Every voice I had ever known echoed in the dark, my mother, my friends, Decker, Sanders, even my own voice calling from behind me. Wait, it begged, don't leave me. But Anna pulled me onward, her grip iron, her breath ragged. Ignore them, trust me. We burst into the cargo bay, the massive doors sealed tight. Snow and ice pressed against them from the outside, glowing faintly in the red light. The storm howled beyond, a living thing pressing down. Anna shoved another note into my hand, her face pale. Rule #13, when the rules contradict each other, trust only the one written last. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Behind us, the walls split open, the voices roared, and the things crawled free. The final night had come, and the rules had become a weapon as much as a prison, and I wasn't sure which one to follow anymore. The bay doors loomed before us, sealed with frost thick enough to look like stone. The storm outside howled, pressing its weight against the steel. Behind us, the facility crumbled. Walls split open, spewing frost and shadows. Voices roared, 1,000 overlapping calls, every one of them familiar. They begged, they screamed, they ordered. My mother's voice, my father's, childhood friends long dead, all of them rising in a chorus that clawed at my mind. Anna shoved me toward the control panel. Open it, she shouted. I can't, the panel was coated in ice, the screen shattered. She pressed another note into my hand, her writing jagged, rushed. Rule #14, the storm is safer than what waits inside. I stared at it, my breath fogging in the freezing air, go outside into a blizzard that could kill in minutes, but the walls behind us bulged, shapes pressing through, faces stretching against the steel like wet paper. The rules whispered in my head, overlapping, contradicting. Never leave your post, never take the elevator after midnight. Don't follow vanished colleagues, trust only the last rule. The last rule was hers. Anna gripped my shoulders, her eyes locked on mine. Listen to me, out there you have a chance, in here you're already dead. The walls screamed as something massive tore through. The bay doors groaned, buckling. I slammed my shoulder against the control lever. It resisted. Frozen in place, I screamed and shoved again. Metal shrieked. The doors cracked, splitting open just enough for the storm to blast in, a wall of white and cold that stole my breath instantly. Anna pushed me forward. Go. What about you? I shouted over the roar. She smiled, calm even now. Someone has to hold them here. Before I could protest, the wall behind her split open. Hands, dozens of them, shot out, wrapping around her arms and legs. She didn't scream, she only shoved me one last time, forcing me into the blizzard, before the shadows swallowed her whole. The storm hit me like a hammer. The wind clawed at my face, the cold biting so deep I couldn't feel my fingers. Snow blinded me, stinging like knives. I stumbled forward, each step a battle. Behind me, the facility groaned, collapsing into itself, the voices rising in a deafening crescendo. I don't know how long I wandered. Minutes. Hours, it didn't matter. My lungs burned, my legs numb. The rules rattled in my head, my only anchor in the white void. Trust the last rule. The storm is safer. Eventually I saw it, a shape in the snow. At first I thought it was another trick, another mimic waiting to lure me, but as I drew closer, it resolved into the outline of a supply shack half buried in ice. Its door stood ajar, snow piled high inside. I forced myself through, collapsing onto the frozen floor. Inside it was dark, but there was shelter. A single lantern sat on a crate, its flame flickering weakly. I huddled beside it. My body shaking violently, my teeth chattering so hard they hurt. I told myself I had made it, that I had survived, but then I saw it. On the crate beside the lantern lay another note, the same handwriting. Rule #15, if you survive, leave no record. Do not write what you've seen. Do not tell your story. The rules spread through words. My blood turned to ice. I looked around the shack, my breath ragged. Was this real? Had Anna left it, or had something else? I pulled the note closer, my hands trembling. On the back, faint and smudged, was another line. If you must write, end it before the intercom calls your name. The lantern sputtered. Outside, the storm raged, and faintly beneath the howl of the wind I heard it, the crackle of an intercom, a voice whispering my name. Once, then again, I froze, pen hovering over the paper. My mind screamed to stop, to end the story here, to obey the last rule. But my hands moved anyway, driven by something deeper, something hungrier. I wrote, knowing every word carried me closer to them. The lantern died. The shack plunged into darkness. The storm's roar filled my ears. And now as I finish this, I can hear the knocking on the walls around me. Slow, patient, tap, tap, tap. They know I'm still writing. They know you're reading, because the rules are never just for me. The intercom crackles again, and this time it whispers your name.